Welcome. I'm Liz Taylor, ocean explorer, naturalist, and entrepreneur.
I'm Sylvia Earle, an oceanographer, National Geographic explorer at large, founder of Mission Blue, and I'm an ocean elder. Thank you, ocean elders, for sponsoring this program.
And this is our show, Dive In, where we host informal and open conversations with the ocean community on topics of wonder and interest. We're really glad to be back with everyone and hope that you've made some time to get outdoors. You can ask questions in the Q&A box as we go through the conversation, and we'll get to as many of them as we can.
Oh,
Oh, there we have our guest today.
wow.
Welcome, Geoff. Um, but before we get any further, we want to remind everyone that the world is
Blue.
blue,
Never forget that.
100%.
Well, no, maybe 97.
97. All right.
Of the biosphere.
Okay. But today our guest is Geoff Green. Geoff is the founder and president of Students on Ice, a trailblazing foundation that has taken thousands of youth educators, elders, leaders, scientists, artists, and others from around the world to the Arctic and remote places in between Arctic and Antarctic. Welcome, Geoff. I'm glad you could get in.
Me too, just in the nick of time.
It
Well,
was.
thank you. It's great to see you. Hi, Sylvia. Hi, Liz.
Hey. So let's jump right in. And do you want to share your slides, or shall I do it?
Why don't you do it? Yeah.
I will do it. All right. Well, while I get onto the screen sharing feature here, can you tell us how you first got interested in the polar regions?
Yeah. Well, I first went to the Arctic. I'm a Canadian, live in Canada, but as a young Canadian at the time, we didn't really learn a lot about our North back then, not like we do as much today. And I was actually telling this story earlier today. I've been at a conference, an Arctic conference all day in Ottawa. And I think the first exposure I had was I was in line for lunch when I was 15 years old, and a boy in front of me turned around and said, "Would you like to try some dried caribou meat?"
Oh
And
dear.
he opened this bag of, and he turned out to be the first Inuk I ever met at the time. And that kind of, and funnily, we're still in contact. His name is James Ariak, and he's gone on to be quite a prominent leader in the North. But I really was in the right place at the right time, and in 1993, I was asked to go up to the very high Arctic on a scientific expedition with some really amazing, legendary folks. And that opened my eyes. From that moment on, we went up to the top of Ellesmere Island and to communities like Pond Inlet, Nunavut. Back then, it was still the Northwest Territories. And from that moment on, I wanted to learn as much as I could and read every book I could find. And a few years later, somebody figured if I've been to the Arctic, I must know something about Antarctica. So in 1994, I was invited to go to Antarctica, and I kind of never looked back. Those two places were so powerful. I realized how they were the cornerstones of our global ecosystem, how they were windows to the world. And as an educator, I'd been a school teacher. I thought, what amazing classrooms these are. Imagine if we exposed youth of the world to these two places. And yeah, so that first introduction to the polar regions changed the way I looked at everything, really. And they also opened up these these symbols of peace and understanding, parts of our planet that have been governed in very unique and effective ways. So yeah, that was the last 35 years or so of my life.
And I was reading that you were really inspired to start the SOI Foundation when you were confronted by a vast sea of chinstrap penguins across the ice.
Yeah, well, that's right. When a penguin walked up to me, pecked me in the leg, and said, "Hey, Geoff, you should bring students down here." And joking aside, certainly all of that connection to nature that you get in these places is so profound. And that was a connection 25 years ago we knew was important, but it's even more important today as youth of the world. And frankly, many of us, no matter how old we are more and more disconnected from that and connected to all these other crazy things like social media.
Yeah.
So that penguin was very wise at the time. That's for sure.
So, Geoff, a lot of people have been to the Arctic and to the Antarctic, but you are exceptional because you, although others may have said, gee, we'd really like to share this with my kids, but you've actually done it. And that's really commendable.
Hmm.
And what an accomplishment. Anyone who goes either to the high north or the deep south, it does change your perspective. You can't help it. You see the world through a different lens ever more. But to be inspired to really do what it has taken to get ships, to get the funding, to figure out which kids, how do you apply, the whole
Hmm.
thing is truly remarkable. And what a difference it is making.
Oh, thanks, Sylvia. I mean, it's very life changing. There's no doubt about it. When you have an experience like that at the beginning of your life, and an experience that it doesn't just fill your head with all kinds of knowledge and information, but it really touches the heart. And it's in those moments when hearts are touched that transformation happens and commitment happens. So, like today at this conference, I was bumping into some of our alumni from 2008, 2012, Inuit youth, in fact, and they still say it's one of the most powerful experiences that they've ever had. Um, so I just like those are heartwarming for me, but I feel fortunate to somehow have stumbled into this job um, and it was thanks to many incredible people that supported that journey early on. And one of those was our dear friend Don Walsh.
Yes.
And Don and I were on an Antarctic expedition. I didn't know who Don was from a hole in the ground. He told me he was an oceanographer from Oregon. It's like, okay, good to meet you. But he was one of those guys that said, you should do this. You should. And those types of people that supported the initial idea. That ship, by the way, is one of the ships that we've been using the last few years. It's a former Coast Guard vessel.
Mhm.
It's the only indigenous-owned icebreaker in the world, and it's been a great platform post-COVID for us. It's on the smaller side, but
Yeah.
really intimate and hands-on, and we're able to go anywhere. We're doing a lot of scientific research as along the journey with the kids as well. So yeah, it's called the Polar Prince. It's a
Excellent.
fun little show.
Yeah. And I hope so. Do you think there's some opportunity that might become your primary ship?
Well, yeah, I mean, we could have bought the ship post COVID, but some wise people said you don't want to buy a ship, Geoff, so we didn't. But we are using it on a regular. We're kind of the core user of that vessel these days. Um, but we've used about 20 different ships since the beginning of Students on Ice and in both the polar regions. So we're using multiple vessels.
That's
But it's a
good.
Think about how much has been learned since you started. I mean, exploration has really been proceeding exponentially. Finding corals and sponges and
mm,
bioluminescent creatures in Antarctica,
yeah,
the hydrothermal activity in the high Arctic, in the deep sea, having the ability to put robots and even submersibles. I remember it was 1997 actually when I got a call from a friend from Russia who had was a pilot of one of the Mir subs. They
Mhm.
actually, for the first time, went to the real North
North
Pole.
Pole.
Yeah,
Anatoly Smotovich.
They wouldn't plant a
remember.
flag there, as I
Yeah,
recall.
and he called me up, and Don Walsh was another good ally that we'd been dreaming about making such a journey. Let's go to the real North Pole. It just happens to be deep
Deep,
within
yeah, deep
the
under
Arctic
the
Ocean.
water.
I remember that moment, and the planting of the flag, of course. And I got a call soon after from another great mentor who used to be the roommate with Don, with a fellow named Dr. Fred Roots. And he reminded me that he planted a flag at the North Pole in 1969. But it wasn't, he didn't actually go down. They dropped it from the surface in the ice and it went down. And it had all the flags of the United Nations on it,
That's
which in
very
many
cool.
ways symbolized the North Pole.
And it's high seas.
Yeah,
The very top of
Yeah,
it is,
that's right.
part of the global commons.
it's such an important piece, I think, that people don't really think about, that it is that everybody has a say, or they should have a say in what governs those northernmost and southernmost regions.
Well, it's one of the things that's made the Antarctic Treaty such a powerful document, um, and a treaty really, and that's been in effect for more than 60 years. The Arctic, still, despite all the geopolitics going on, it's a place where there is a very civil discussion happening, including around how if and when the North Pole Arctic Ocean gets divvied up. So that's a process that's been going on for more than a decade. So they are really symbols in so many respects.
But Jeff, did anybody ask the polar bears
Or the krill.
for
Well,
the Arctic
I,
char? Who are
I
who are
have,
we anyway?
yeah,
Our
but
wall.
they're pretty cagey. They don't let on. Um, this photo, by the way, is one of the larger groups. So in a group like this on a larger ship, we'd have 130 students
Wow.
from all over the world, together with a team of about 90 educators, which are made up of elders and musicians and scientists and artists and you name it, like magical people sharing their knowledge with those kids.
It's so powerful, when you can just get out and pull out the hand lens, or pull out the
Telescope or
over this,
headlights.
yeah, telescope hand lens, but you just get such a holistic view of the place, and then just the sharing of knowledge between everyone, and the cross-pollination that goes on is just a wonderful thing to see unfold.
It's really heartwarming. It gives cause for hope because you see these youth, they they are passionate, um, they are not jaded and cynical. They just think anything's possible. And then when you like, I think part of the magic for me is that when you put youth together from all around the world, a global commons, as it were, and they address global issues together, that's where the magic happens. And we've had youth from almost 60 countries over the last 25 years, and those become these friendships and these bonds that last a lifetime. Um, and that's what we need more of today, isn't it? More than ever
Absolutely.
before.
And I love this image because, you have them out on the ship, and they're kind of students on ocean, and then there's students on the ice, and then it's just making these blue-green connections for them,
Yeah.
I think, is just the most powerful piece.
Well, you nailed it there, Liz, because we probably could have and maybe should have called this students on oceans or ocean because we spend more time on an ocean than we do on ice. It's too late to change now, but this photo really symbolizes that connection. And you don't know what's going through the minds of that student at that moment, but you know it's something different and new. And they're looking at their own lives, they're looking at the connections with others, with the planet. And that's really what it's all about. We've just always wanted to provide a very holistic experience. And because all students they're going to gravitate to different areas of interest. Some will want to be leaders and scientists, and others will want to be school teachers and even just finish high school in many cases. Like 70% of the youth now that participate are Indigenous youth from all over the world. that have come from really, in many cases, very difficult backgrounds. So this gives them a whole other experience and connection to help them on their journey.
Well, Sylvia always says, and people say, "What can I do? What can I do?" And she says, "Hold up the mirror. What are you good at? What good at numbers, good at drawing, good at storytelling, but whatever it is that there's something that they can grab onto and run with it."
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one expedition, this young girl from China came up to me. Her name was Sun Yi, and she's well, she was 16 years old, and she was quite shy. English wasn't her first language, and she just said to me, this was near the end of the expedition, she said, I'm going to write a book about climate change in China. And so I was like, that's a great idea, Sonia. You should do that. And about a year and a half later, this box arrived in the mail at our office, and it was 100 copies of her book
Wow.
published by Chinese Science Press and distributed to youth all over China.
That must have just been, like heart moment.
It totally was. I couldn't read a word of it because it was in Chinese, but I'm sure it was amazing. This is another moment that you see. Um, This is a girl from New York City, actually, and she's with Roger Bull, one of our scientists from the Canadian Museum of Nature, and yeah, learning about Arctic plants and that about permafrost and tundra, but you can see in those moments like how powerful
Yeah,
it is. And most of the kids that participate, I should say, are fully funded by our foundation. So they receive scholarships to participate. And about 90% of the youth, that's how they get involved. They're sponsored by all kinds of different organizations, foundations, governments, corporations. And yeah, as a result, we get youth from first world, third world, inner city youth, small island developing states, you name it. Which, yeah, we always wanted it to be something that was available to anybody interested to go.
that's so awesome. And I love that they each have like the hand lens.
Yeah, you see that? Yeah,
It's
yeah,
great.
exactly.
One of the best tools.
It
Everyone
really
should
is.
have one.
Oh boy. Well, on the in the ice there, we're really students on ice that day. That's in Antarctica, and we were doing some ice drilling.
Mhm.
And using it sort of more as an educational exercise, but to teach how those layers of the ice caps of Greenland and the Antarctic are like the rings of a tree that tell us about the age of, in this case, of our planet. And that's something those youth will never ever forget. Um, yeah. And then on the other side is some of our Inuit youth drum dancing somewhere up north. I forget where that is, but it's a chance for, in many cases, for those Inuit youth, it's a chance to really take pride in their culture and share their culture with these students from all over the world. It's
Really
really
good.
beautiful to see.
It's just, seeing the sort of the science tools in action, and then the traditional tools of music and communication in action. It's a great combination.
It really, yeah, it really is. Um, yeah, it's hard to really describe it. It's such a crazy circus of things that happen from global levels down to very personal levels. Um, and it's evolved over the years. At the beginning, it was certainly more focused on more simple. Like the world was more innocent. We didn't have cell phones 25 years ago for the most part, which is hard to believe. And we weren't talking about climate change. And in those 25 years, it's become like the journeys are now about mental health. They're about contemporary issues, climate policy. We have delegations of kids that go onto the COP meetings. They go to global conferences, national conferences. Um, it's become much more complex, I'd say, as the world has become more complex and continues to be. So yeah, here we have some youngs, like the youngest youth would be around 14.
Uh-huh.
We also have a program now that's post-secondary, so it goes up to 30, 35 years old. And that's more, those youth are obviously more on a career path. So Um, it focuses more on that than the holistic stuff. But
Right. Is
yeah,
that, is that
all
part
of
of,
our expeditions have been endorsed as official actions of the UN Ocean Decade. And in that process, we started something called Blue Futures Pathways. And it's
right?
a new project within the Students on Ice Foundation, specifically geared at connecting youth to all of those opportunities in the sustainable blue economy, which, as you know, are limitless, from clean energies to conservation to science. Um, and so many of the youth that are live in coastal areas are indigenous youth. So we're really trying to put them at the front lines of those opportunities in the future.
Non-destructive use of the sea.
Yeah. And
Absolutely. Yeah,
it's,
it has to be sustainable or there's really no point.
and just the basics of like learning how to launch and recover things like this ROV over the
It's a
side.
phantom.
I know
Yeah.
it's a phantom. It's an old, I probably
Yeah,
helped.
I don't know where that photo came from, but we do have our own ROVs, and the youth learned how to drive them.
Yeah.
It
It's
probably has Liz's fingerprints on
Yeah,
it.
probably. I probably shipped this one out decades ago. Um,
And
and then,
then on the left, there's much more ancient technology, but created by Inuit, and that's the kayak. And we build these kayaks. They're based on Inuit designs, but instead of sealskin, we're using ballistic nylon.
thank you.
Um, the youth get out paddling, and we also bring paddle boards now, so we can paddle board around icebergs and jump on icebergs, and we have a lot of fun. It's not
So,
all just learning.
so
Yeah.
Jeff, do some of the kids go to both poles?
Yeah, some do. Some very lucky ones do. It's not the norm, but I just interviewed, we just launched a podcast last month to help celebrate our 25th anniversary. And one of the first youth I interviewed was a girl, her name's Malika Vaz from India. You would love her. She came with us to the Antarctic when she was, I think, 14, and to the Antarctic when she was 16. And we just released that podcast, I think, on Monday.
Hmm.
But she's now a National Geographic explorer, young explorer. She was just voted top 30 under 30 by Forbes magazine. And she's got her own production company making essentially environmental films, but she's doing things like going undercover because she's this beautiful, tall Indian girl with that gorgeous accent, and she walks into these, like in some cases, criminal syndicates that are
Wow.
trading in illegal wildlife, like manta rays, and she breaks that story.
Wow.
She's a really amazing. So she's an example of one of our kids that went to both the poles.
Excellent. And what do we got going on here?
Here, it looks like different types of ocean drifters that are helping to track ocean currents.
Mhm.
Um, the one in my hand on the right there is just like a frisbee. They don't last too long, but they do surface current mapping, and then that other one opens up like a big um, umbrella, and it tracks a different type of current. But we're trying to determine. We've been doing this for about 20 years in mostly in the Davis Strait between Greenland and Canada and Baffin Island to see if increased melt from the well primarily from Greenland is changing those currents. And those currents, of course, once they come down past Newfoundland through the Labrador Current, are what drive to a large degree the Gulf Stream
Right.
and
Right. The big conveyor.
the big conveyor. And yeah, so that's part of a long-term study that we've been a part of.
Excellent.
One of those projects you would love is that youth have dropped these glass bottles, so they're made of sand, and they drift, and quite often they wind up in Europe. They've been found along the coasts of Spain, France, Norway, Ireland, Iceland, and the people that find those bottles, they read the note from the student in the bottle, that drop the bottle, and then we
Message.
connect them.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
it's an incredible way of, yeah, of teaching and connecting people.
And then here it looks like we're dealing with some animal products.
Here we're with some elders that are teaching the youth how they um, make clothing out of sealskin. Yeah, so like a lot of these elders, they were born on the land, and so you've got this incredible intergenerational sharing happening between the youth and the elders, which is really powerful.
And one of the interesting comparisons between the Arctic and Antarctic is that there's a deep history of people in the Arctic, not so much in Antarctica.
True.
No, not no, that's very true. Like for in the Arctic, of course, for millennia, there have been the Dorset people, the Thule, now today's Inuit. Um, so it is a homeland, very
And
much
they
first and
have
foremost.
this intimate relationship with wildlife, and
Absolutely.
they would never take so many that all the polar bears would be gone. They
No,
wouldn't take fish by the ton, wouldn't
that's
even think of doing such a thing because it's wasteful, it's harmful, and you could kill the very system that you rely on for your existence. In Antarctica, by contrast, the new opening of only over a couple of 100 years access to Antarctic waters, that also is a global commons,
hmm
is the Antarctic Ocean. I mean, nobody and everybody, it's a global commons. The whales own it, the seals own it, the albatross own it, if anybody, and krill, and that there are ships taking tons of krill and small fish and deep sea fish. It, it
Yeah,
it's really something that we just did not think through. It
Hmm.
was just there for a small number of the human population to disproportionately exploit. And it's taking and subtracting, harming a system that everybody needs.
you couldn't have said it better, Sylvia, because it is the krill are the only link in the food chain, really, in the
Hmm.
Antarctic. And just in the last 10 years, the increase in krill fishery, which more or less is unregulated,
Well, the
is
sustainable take is essentially zero.
it is like you never, ever, ever saw any kind of fishing vessel around the Antarctic Peninsula. But now you're seeing them there and they're competing against whales in some cases, right? Like within 100 meters of
Yeah.
fishing.
And the penguins need the krill too. And I mean, it's just like all these other animals that
Everything,
rely on
every single
krill.
species in
Yeah.
the Antarctic, the krill, the
The cornerstone
penguin, the
species.
seal, the whales, the seabirds, krill
And
is
the
the
climate connection might seem a little sketchy, but it isn't. It's the carbon cycle in action. We're removing millions of tons of carbon called krill and releasing that carbon into the
yeah,
atmosphere
that's
while disrupting the carbon cycle that normally would involve sequestering that carbon back into the deep sea. And the food chains, all of it, the chemistry of the ocean, it's a living system that we have without thinking about it much. It's just there for the taking by those who could get there.
and
And
a lot of those krill, as you probably know, are being used to feed fish farms in the north,
Norway,
Yeah.
in Norway and other parts of the world, but often Norway is involved. I know it's Antarctica. It was only essentially touched by humans about 200 odd years ago, where the
1820,
Arctic has lived in harmony with nature for thousands and thousands of years. So I mean, they are polar opposite in that sense, I would say.
Yeah.
I've always been a big believer in the power of the youth voice, because they're not afraid to say anything. And we've had so many examples of youth and youth groups from students on this go to share their voices. And one of those examples is in Antarctica, where we've tabled papers at the Antarctic Treaty meetings. But more recently, the youth wrote, I'll send you a copy because it's quite a beautiful piece. But it's a youth statement on the Southern Ocean. And it's essentially saying why the Southern Ocean needs to be protected. And,
Yes, all of it, all of
Yeah.
it.
Not it's
I
just,
mean, having the Ross Sea established was a great move in the
A
right
start.
direction. But why is it being exploited disproportionately by a few? And in so doing, really, with climate consequences, with biodiversity consequences, moral, ethical consequences.
yeah.
I mean, go down the list. Why are we there in the first place? And those deep sea fish too, that
Well,
orange
yeah,
line.
the Patagonian toothfish.
Oh my God, right?
Chilean sea bass.
The mislabeling of ocean wildlife is just
Instead of just
phenomenal.
looking at them as money or chunks of meat,
I
Well,
they're
should have brought it today, but I have a fish hook from that fishery that I keep on my desk at my office because we found it in the nest of a wandering albatross
oh,
years
no,
ago, and it luckily had somehow coughed it up, but that's not often the case.
yeah,
um,
wow.
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that was a one of those magical moments that we get to have when I was able to lift a wandering albatross off the nest so these British Antarctic Survey scientists could check the eggs.
Uh-huh.
And
And the
that it was like a mad, like it's biggest seabird in the world. And it sort of pecked at me gently, but it was quite calm.
That's cool. It's just like, yeah, I can just imagine that big bird picking it up like that.
Oh my God. It's like a head as big as yours.
Yeah,
Can fly 5,000 nautical miles in a week soaring the Southern Ocean. It
incredible.
lived to be, decades and decades old. It's a truly magnificent. And a
and,
wingspan, as you know, is up to 12 feet wide.
and
Yeah,
again, it's the fishing, which is perfectly legal, but it should not be legal. It's immoral. The catch, not just of the fish themselves, but
the bycatch.
catching albatross. These
Hey,
long,
what? Oh, shoot. I wish in my other room over there, um, I'd take you to show you, but if I unplug this computer, it's going to die. I have a life-size wandering albatross, a
oh,
sculpture in our living room.
You have to
It's
get a hand truck, bring it in.
yeah,
the puffy
we
albatross.
could have taken this webinar mobile, but I better
Mobile.
not do that.
Yeah.
Um, this photo, uh, so we do all kinds of different things on every expedition. The expeditions are generally about 2 weeks long, but every day we're stopping and going places and hiking on glaciers. And this is a workshop that we did on the Sustainable Development Goals, and each of the youth had to pick their favorite SDGs, and it's just an example of the all the different things. And we're doing this probably. I think this is a site we discovered about 10 years ago, where there are ancient sod houses of
Mm.
Thule that lived there 1,500
Oh,
years ago. So you're walking in the footsteps of people that lived here long before us.
It's so incredible. And the whole I really love seeing the sort of the proliferation of the SDGs and people really working to implement them, not only in their daily lives, but in their workplaces, in their clubs and other sports clubs and all kinds of places just to kind of see where do they align? How many can we align with? And it's number 14 is always like the least the least noticed of them all. So it's the one that we try to celebrate the most.
I'm sure, yes, I'm sure you love number 14 as you should. No, the SDGs are truly a roadmap for our planet, and we just have to follow it, which not everybody is doing,
Yeah.
but No, they're great teaching tools for youth. That's for
Well,
sure.
fascinating is that since the SDG declarations, a lot has changed. And
Yeah.
nobody knew how fast ice could melt. And it's really a wake-up call. We should at least achieve these goals, but we need to go further. The
You sure do. Yeah.
of
No, it's
30% of land and sea by 2030. Well, it's a milestone, but it's not an end point.
no, and so the previous goal of 10% by 2020,
Yeah.
um, that was a mission that we got behind and supported, and I'm happy to say in Canada we achieved that. Um, Largely in part to a huge portion of the Northwest Passage that became a national a national marine conservation area in 2019. Um, it's now called Talarutu Imanga.
Hmm.
And now, of course, we've got 30 by 30, and we're doing our darndest to support that as well. We've got 5 more years to go, and I'll still,
And
what?
presently, if you really only count areas that are protected, it's about 3%.
Yeah, we have a
Wow.
long way to go.
For the ocean, it's maybe 15% for the land. And when I say
Mm,
fully protected, it means you don't kill the wildlife,
right.
Yeah,
or you only kill wildlife on a very limited scale, like it's dinner. It's not by the ton.
Yeah.
yeah.
You
And
don't
that,
use
that's
wildlife as money.
No, no, you,
no, that's yeah, and that was the case with that one I mentioned. It was essentially protected for traditional uses only
mhm,
by Inuit. Um,
And even some of those traditions change when individual species get so low. Um, I mean, every polar bear counts, for example.
right,
Every every narwhal counts. But the real problem is not that level. It's the industrial taking of wildlife
yeah,
and truly using wild animals as money. We get it with elephants and ivory. That's a terrible thing. And people understand that. Or killing songbirds to take
mm,
to the marketplace. Not because you're hungry, but because you're hungry for money.
right.
And you exceed by far the amount that the natural system can replenish. But in the ocean, we have a different mindset. It's not even regarded as it's like fish and wildlife instead of just wildlife.
Wildlife.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
all
Like they're they're somehow a separate entity from wildlife.
But it is kind of unfortunate and really trying to figure out like how do you fix the the issue around the polar bear hunting because it continues in in Canada with some of the trophy hunting where even though it's limited to
it's hunting for money,
but it's hunting for money but
not for
it's
need.
but we see that we can't get the polar bear moved up the list for protection to like a zero take situation and
Yeah, the trophy hunting is should be stopped in my opinion. There's no
yeah,
doubt about
It's
it.
morally bankrupt.
it is.
Yeah, you can't hunting of that nature of any species. I completely find it just appalling and shocking, like how pulling a trigger to do that is a joyful thing. But the Inuit again, the Inuit have lived in harmony with nature for so long, and the the quota system that they have for whether that's for certain types of whales or like bowhead whales, there's only one allowed each year as a traditional hunt that's spread throughout the north, in except for Alaska. That's a different story.
Yeah.
The polar bear. So there's. I'm not a polar bear expert. I've seen a lot of polar bears in my life. I'm happy to say that there's 17 subpopulations in Canada, and the population's fairly steady. And the bears that we're seeing for the most part every summer are quite healthy bears, which is
Good.
there's a couple populations, particularly in southern Hudson Bay, where the populations are are struggling, mostly because of climate change, I would say, not from overhunting. Um,
Yes.
but the other, like this one bear, I've seen the same bear for about 3 years in a row in the Torn Gap Mountains in the same place. And there's no ice at that time of year anymore. So they can't be out on the ice hunting seals. But whether they've learned it recently or they've known it for forever, they're fishing for char along
Wow.
the coastline. And in this river, well, in the rivers, it's you can understand like a grizzly. But
Sure.
out in open water, you'll see these bears, including this one bear that I love, and it swims along and then it dives head down and its legs are thrashing and kicking the surface, and it comes up holding an Arctic char in its paws.
Wow.
And
Well, a
and it
guy's got to
is
do what a guy has to do. Come on.
Yeah.
Go
yeah,
hunting.
because they are so smart, but it is fat and healthy. So, you know, take that for whatever it's worth, but um overall, I think that polar bears are they're adapting, and particularly in the far north, they're still doing quite well,
Oh, that's good.
despite
Good to hear.
some of the stories that you hear.
It's generally not good news as the habitat, as the ice
Yeah,
shrink. And as, again, the human pressures, the Arctic of 1,000 years ago is not the Arctic of the 21st century.
But
And
I think
the
more, we're seeing more people really kind of getting it. And, the whole Canada C3 expedition that she carried out that kind of did that all along the longest coastline of the world and engaging with, we have another ocean elder here, don't we?
yeah, that was one of those crazy ideas that I don't know where that came from, but the idea was to sail in 2017 from coast to coast to coast around Canada's entire coastline. And it was to help celebrate the 150th birthday of Canadian Confederation. And it was an incredible journey. It was 5 months, about 25,000 kilometers. Our This young fellow here, who you know well, um, your fellow ocean elder, Prince
Prince
Albert,
Albert
Prince Albert, yeah.
II.
he joined us on that journey just for a day, but he came in to provide his support. And that's the flag in the frame. We actually flew that all the way around Canada. That's what was left of it at the end. But it was an incredible journey, and the idea of it was, and it can be extrapolated, I think, to the world, but it was to look at the past,
Yes.
look at the future, um, and look at our present as well. Where are we? Where do we want to go from here? And by looking at the past too, we that meant looking at some of the parts of our history that weren't very well, less than pleasant, but parts that a lot of Canadians didn't know about, which we know more about now, like residential school
Oh,
Oh,
yeah. And
and some of those really harsh realities of Canada. So it was an incredible journey. Um, yeah, every day was powerful. This was one of my favorite photos of that journey where we sailed. This is a big chunk of probably the Peterman ice shelf up in northern Greenland that's broken off of the Greenland ice cap and is drifting down the Labrador Current side along Baffin Island. And isn't that a magnificent? But it's also kind of a sad photo because of what it represents with the Greenland ice cap melting.
yeah, that ice should be up on the land.
That was part of a big ice cap
Yeah.
several years earlier. We mostly see these in the Antarctic, like the one that's heading to South Georgia right now. But we have seen them now in the Canadian Arctic because of the breakup of the Greenland ice cap.
Yeah, it's a great, it really gives people a sense of the scale. This sort of smaller research vessel and then this giant mattress of ice just,
Yeah, and you're only seeing the tip, aren't you?
yeah, yeah, you can see it sort of bluing out below, but it goes way down deep.
I think that one was actually stuck on bottom, and
Hmm.
in about like 1,000 feet of water and
Wow,
it's stuck.
unreal.
Isn't that incredible? Yeah, that's the same ship, but it was a different color back then. We had
Well,
a
it started off as a like you say, as a Canadian Coast Guard ship, right? Right.
Yeah, it was, and we did a lot of science on that journey. We took eDNA samples all the way around the Canadian coastline, um, and that has helped to produce the first biodiversity survey of Canada's entire coastline, which is now the results are just starting to come out. Of course, we also had to zip around Alaska. It was kind of in our way. It took about
Darn it,
22
Alaska.
days. I mentioned that to Timothy Galladay from NOAA
Uh-huh.
one day. He said he was watching this documentary that we made about that journey, and I said, "Yeah, Alaska should really belong to Canada." He chuckled and he wrote me back like on Monday saying, "Yeah, I loved your joke about Alaska, but I know people that probably wouldn't appreciate that joke." Um, Going around Alaska was magnificent as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's the end of our slides. All
The end
right.
of our slide. Yeah, 25 years. It's been an amazing journey. It continues. We have expeditions coming up this spring and summer along the Labrador coast primarily. A lot of what we're doing too is working with indigenous communities to support, uh, in many cases, basic data collection of their marine zones so that they can better understand what's there
Hmm.
and help them make those informed decisions of what should they create a marine protected area, what should they do. So we're really proud to be part of those types of projects as well.
So the technology that has made possible extravagant exploitation of the ocean cuts both ways. We have technology in parallel that for the first time makes it possible to understand what's there. Exploration. And we really ought to put the emphasis on, first of all, let's figure it out. Let's see who's living there. What's the real value of krill? Not just squeezing the oil out of them for
Oh,
cosmetics or munching them together to feed the cows or chickens and pigs and salmon.
such. Yeah.
They're real value. They're part of what keeps us alive, not just the creatures who dine upon them directly. They shape the nature of the ocean. They have a key role. And for us to just think of them as little tips of
Mm.
Protein.
meat or oil or
Yeah.
something,
Some.
and this
They're the biggest
should
biomass on planet Earth, krill,
Yeah. Yeah.
of any single species, more than humans. But we mess with that, we don't have a clue what that means in the big
Yeah.
picture.
This is the first time we're right on the edge, Jeff, of being able, as never before, to put these pieces together. And at the same time, we're just about to lose the opportunity because of the loss of life in the sea and on the land. But it's like a race, and you're part of cheering the
Huh.
generation includes everybody in the 21st century. We're all in this together right now.
Yeah.
But we have the best chance right now, or we're going to lose the best chance right now.
Mm.
So before we jump to a couple questions, I wanted to ask you about the expedition to Iceland as well.
Oh, yeah, please.
Oh, okay. Well, what we've done a few expeditions that start in Iceland.
Hmm.
We've also done a few expeditions just within Iceland themselves, and we tend to do those close to this thing called the Arctic Circle Conference that has
Yeah.
become a big annual event. And then after doing the expedition, these youth um, attend that conference and speak at it. So it's been a great experience. It's an interesting conference. It's one that's unlike the Arctic Council, which really looks at the governance of the Arctic. This one's more looking at the business of the Arctic. So, yeah, it's important that the youth voice is there to be heard. But one of the journeys we did in 2005 from Iceland to Greenland to Canada, we had a certain fellow future prime minister on board with us. Mr. Trudeau came, and I remember walking in the tundra with him one day and contemplating whether he should go into politics or not. And of course, he did. I think the Students on Ice experience must have inspired him to do that. But
That's good.
I mean, I'm sure you guys know and love Iceland. It's a very special part of the world.
Yeah,
A lot of moss.
a lot of moss. I've always wanted to explore under the water there, you know.
It's where the mid-Atlantic ridge cuts right through Iceland.
It sure is. I sailed the Mid-Atlantic Ridge from South Georgia right up to Tristan da Cunha, well, Gough, Tristan da Cunha, Saint Helena, Madeira,
Yeah.
Canaries. It was an incredible journey.
Don't forget Ascension.
Yeah.
Did I forget Ascension? Ascension, yes, of course. Tristan da Cunha, one of the family names on that island is Green. There's only
Oh,
7 families, so they just immediately thought I was a member of the family, and
of course you are.
Invited you right in.
yeah, I was invited into every little cottage
Oh, that's
on that
awesome.
island. Um, well, on that Iceland to Greenland journey, though, there was a day where we came across a blue whale mother and her calf.
Oh, beautiful.
Really?
Yeah, and it just sat there beside our ship. It was one of those moments. There's so many moments, and another one that involves whales was in 2006, and we used to do this expedition called the Flow Edge Journey, and we would camp on the frozen Arctic Ocean, but right at the flow edge where the open ocean meets the frozen ocean. And it's at that time of year in the spring where all the wildlife is waiting to come back. The bears are there, the seals, the seabirds, and it was the very last day of our journey, and we were having a group hug. The kids like, let's have a group hug. I'm like, all right. And as we're doing that, one of the girls said, "There's a whale." And right at the edge of the flow edge, a bowhead whale had surfaced, like a
Oh, beautiful.
and it was like a needle in a haystack that that whale would show up when it did. And it just sat there, and we all stood there silently and like a meter away from this thing. And you could feel it breathing in your bones. And after a few minutes, it took this deep breath and arched its back and dove right under the ice under our feet and disappeared.
Wow.
And then the kids said, after a few minutes of silence, they're like, that whale came to deliver us a message, to take what we've learned and go home and make a difference. And
Yes.
and it's just one of hundreds of examples of how youth have made it. Like those kids wrote to the House of Commons, to the Prime Minister, to the Minister of the environment at the time, and they joined this big effort, and that led to the creation of a marine protected area for bowhead whales on Baffin Island in 2008.
Outstanding.
Yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah.
one of those.
It's results. It's amazing. Okay, we're gonna jump to a few questions.
Okay.
Michael is asking, what are all the commercial uses of krill?
Ooh,
It's a big list, unfortunately.
yeah. Well, I know that probably the most recognizable use of that would be omega-3. That
The
is
oil, the
yeah,
krill oil. Mhm.
Yeah. We use
it's
it
a
for there's a lot of
big
Laser.
source of that, and it's in high demand. So that's one. The other that I'm aware of is feeding fish farms. So fish feed
Mhm.
from the south to the north, which is kind of crazy when you think about the environmental cost that goes into those farm salmon.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the removal of the krill and the damage that does to the ecosystem, but just all the fuel of like going to find them and catch them and process them and flash freezing.
The irony is that there are alternatives. Krill do not make the oil.
Omega-3. No,
They consume the
Mm,
base of the food chain.
the algae.
The various phytoplankton that do synthesize the oils. And it's true with the oily fish, you're recommended to have fish oil for the omega-3s or for cosmetic purposes, or to feed to cows, chickens, pigs, and salmon and other farmed creatures. I mean, if you asked a cow, they'd probably say, please don't feed me krill or ground up fish. It's not in my menu. But
What is this? It tastes a little.
I don't have any choice.
Yeah.
But to go all the way to Antarctica to catch these animals that are so critical to, again, think climate as well as the diversity of life, cornerstone species. When you can, and some companies at least, are growing the algae in a concentrated form, and you don't have to worry about microplastics or nanoplastics or all the chemicals that are flowing into the sea that come back through the phytoplankton into the fish and then back to you.
Yeah.
Or the krill. You don't, you squeeze the oil out, you squeeze whatever's in that oil that you might not want to.
Want
But
your
if
body.
you are cultivating from known sources under controlled circumstances, first of all, there's no fuel cost going all the way to Antarctica
And back.
and back.
Yeah, which are significant.
And all the noise, all the other damage that these fleets of vessels making long transits from, well, they're called distant water fleets
Right.
because they're distant from home base.
Very distant.
And squid is another example.
Mm-hmm.
In the high seas and in the waters around Antarctica, they're not the manufacturers of the very substance that are really desired for the omega oils. Or the squid are taken for their bodies.
Yeah.
But again, they're miracles of life that are so important alive. And that's one of the things that getting those kids to see these creatures, not in a bottle, not in a jar, not in a bag of stuff you feed to your chickens, but rather, oh, who are you?
They're so cool alive.
No, that's going back to the genesis of Students on Ice. It's always been for those youth to see, touch, smell, connect with these things that then they get it, and those issues become real and they become personal. Climate change isn't some abstract thing anymore. For them, they see it.
Yeah.
It's a great, well, we can't take all the youth of the world on a journey like Students on Ice, but that's why we've always instilled the responsibility that you've had this incredible opportunity and this privilege. Now go make a difference.
Yes.
They're ambassadors, everyone.
They are very much ambassadors. Yeah, absolutely. In their communities, in their families, with their children, and of course, in some cases on national and international levels.
Yeah, could
In
become a
fact,
prime minister or something.
Or something.
they might, or you might know, Sylvia, he's the vice president of education at the Explorers Club. Trevor Wallace, a great young man who came with us when he was 16 years old.
Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah.
And so this all sort of ties into the next question was, are there any, or do you have a favorite organization that's kind of advocating for krill protection?
Haha. I don't think I know of a group. I mean, some of the big um, environmental groups they've been going toe to toe with CAMLAR. Like CAMLAR is the entity that can regulate, but it needs consensus. And as I'm sure you're very well aware, the last decade, it gets vetoed every year by Russia or China.
Yeah. It's like, it has to like full consensus, not just sort of majority, right?
Exactly. And CAMLAR is sort of the marine living resource entity of the Antarctic Treaty.
So
I know of a few
right.
individuals that are fighting against the krill fishery, but I wish I could rhyme off a bunch of organizations that are doing it. But do you know of any, Sylvia?
Well, NRDC has been a champion for this. The Antarctic um,
Yeah.
organization. Yeah.
Yeah, um, there's a few groups, but I'm going to do some homework on that because I'm worried that there aren't enough voices fighting this on an organized level.
But you know, the really good news is that because one of the biggest markets is this, you know, this krill oil, this omega-3 oil, it's something that every single consumer can be inspired
Yeah.
to stop consuming and drive the demand down. So
Well, I don't know if you remember the Chilean sea bass protest for a long time, where restaurants were really petitioned not to sell that anymore because Chilean sea bass is the marketing term for Patagonian toothfish.
correct.
And I think that was very effective. Like
Yeah.
the choices we make as consumers can make such a difference in so many, on pretty much every issue if we
Yeah, I think
put our
so.
money where our mouth is.
All right, one last question because we're creeping a little bit past the top of the hour, but we started a couple minutes late too. Um, so this person is asking us, saying they're concerned about the continued decrease of federal funding with our administration. But how
Hmm.
are things in Canada? Is the Canadian government still funding science there?
Yeah, I'm happy to say we are.
Thank
We're
you.
still in the Paris Agreement. We're still, yeah, I think we're not doing as much as we can, but we've had a really good run, I'd say, in the last 10 years or more. We are closing in on an election, and that's going to be a bit of a watershed moment. So that election will probably happen in around March. Um, and I hope we'll continue that like the we've been championing climate change and we had a carbon tax that didn't go so well. And so it'll be a big election issue. But we're still funding science. We don't muzzle scientists. Uh, yeah, but we're into interesting times, aren't we? And what the next year or two, there's certainly a big shift towards the economy being the number one issue. And
Right.
it's amazing how quickly all
Mm.
those other things have been kind of put on the shelf. Um, but they're still there. Like this conference I was at today was a great example. Um, and I hope that's going to continue.
I certainly do
So,
too.
so Jeff, I was struggling a little bit. I had the acronym in my mind, but it's the Antarctic and Southern Ocean Coalition, ASOC.
ASOP.
ASOC, I was
Around
thinking the same. Okay, good.
since the 70s,
Yeah,
really championing protection. Without ASOC and the members, and check it out if you're interested in really lending a hand, lending your voice, working through them, with them, getting up to speed on what the real issues are and actions that can be taken. This is
mm,
this is a go-to place. Pew Charitable Trust has been doing a lot in terms of investing and supporting the work that leads to understanding.
right.
With knowing comes caring.
Yeah. And of course, the government agencies like the British Antarctic Survey have
Yeah.
been working for years to explore and try to understand. And various nations have been there for exploration, but it's conservation. You need the knowledge, but you need to then act on it. And it's been tough because they talk about the economy as being the primary driver of so many decisions, but we're not really accounting for the value of the living systems. We're not accounting for the impact on what makes Earth habitable, on the climate consequences. We
No.
have a very limited view of the value of nature.
Oh my God, we're such a strange species, aren't we? The three things that should be the number one priority for us is clean air, clean water, and clean earth. The things that we need to survive our very species, and we don't prioritize those things. Um, I don't know what it is about us, but we have to make they have to be priorities. The other group, by the way, I see Gigi's putting up some things in the chat. The other group I just thought of is Oceanites, and they have studied the penguins of the Antarctic for the last 40 years, based out of Washington. And I'm guessing they're doing something about the krill as well.
Good.
Dee Boersma
Yeah.
is a key. What do you call her? Penguinologist?
Yeah, and Ron Naveen, if you're listening, Ron, he's been doing this since the dinosaurs, I think. And yeah, there's some great penguin champions who are also krill champions. But ASOC, thanks, Sylvia, because we have collaborated with them to some degree. And that Southern Ocean Youth Declaration I mentioned, we sent that to them to help disseminate that when it was written as well.
All right. Well, we are a little past the top of the hour, so we've got to leap off today. But before we go, we want to say thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you to our producer, the Ocean Elders, and to everyone out there in the dive-in community that continues to show up and dive in with us and participate. Water connects us all, and we are incredibly grateful. We'll be back again in March, and we're going to be talking about sea snakes.
Ooh,
Very misunderstood animal.
they're so sweet.
But they're wonderful.
Gentle.
I've gone diving with big balls of sea snakes in the island of
They're
Niue.
safe.
Niue.
Yeah, they're just beautiful. But until then, remain curious and remember, take care of the ocean.
As if your life depends on it, because
It
it
does.
It does indeed. And can I just say, it's been a real honor to just having this chat with you. I should be the one interviewing you on our podcast, not the other way around. But
Well, it's there to be done.
honestly, keep up the amazing work, you guys. Yeah, maybe I'll call you up. But thanks so much. So great to be with both of you.
Thank you. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.